A quiet evening turns into a nightmare when a black man is pulled over by a white police officer. It starts with an aggressive tone, escalates with unnecessary force, and ends with a shocking act of brutality. But what if I told you that this wasn't the end of the story? Far from it. In fact, the most jaw-dropping moment comes later, when this same officer finds himself face-to-face with his victim in a way he never expected. The twist? The man he brutalized now holds the power to decide his fate. This is not just a story about a single encounter. It's about power, justice, and the complex web of accountability in a system many believe is broken. You won't believe how this story unfolds. Stay with me to the very end, because every twist and revelation will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. And trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. If you're new here, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this that reveal the truths hidden in plain sight. And as you watch, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation. Every story has a beginning, but some stories start with an ending so unimaginable it changes everything. Tonight, we uncover the chilling chain of events that began as a routine traffic stop and spiraled into a brutal confrontation, one that would test the very core of justice and accountability. This is the story of Anthony Reed, a black man known for his leadership and unwavering commitment to his community. On a fateful evening, he crossed paths with Officer Derek Colson, a seasoned cop who held the power of the badge but lacked the restraint it demanded. What unfolded that night would not only leave scars, but expose a deep, uncomfortable truth about the power dynamics in law enforcement. But what makes this case different? It's not just the brutality, it's what happened after. It's the moment the balance of power shifted in a way that no one, not even Officer Colson, could have foreseen. This isn't just about one man or one act of violence. It's about the systems we live under, the lives they impact, and the questions we have to ask. How does someone rebuild after experiencing such injustice? How does a community heal when trust is broken? And most importantly, what happens when the person wronged is given the chance to hold their aggressor accountable? This story is layered, complex, and filled with twists you won't see coming, so buckle up and stay with me to the very end. Because what happens next is not just shocking, it's a lesson for all of us. And before we dive in further, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. These stories matter, and your engagement helps us uncover more hidden truths. Drop your thoughts in the comments as we go. This is a conversation we all need to have. The night began like any other for Officer Derek Colson, a man with nearly 2 decades on the force. He was known around the department for his sharp instincts, but also for his quick temper. On this night, that temper would collide with a force greater than he could have ever anticipated. Anthony Reed had just left a community event where he'd been praised for his work mentoring local youth. For Anthony, this was more than just another night. It was a moment of pride, a culmination of years of effort to uplift his neighborhood despite systemic challenges. But as he drove home, unaware of what awaited him, a pair of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, followed by the shrill wail of a siren. The traffic stop seemed routine at first. Anthony, calm and composed, reached for his ID and rolled down his window. But Officer Colson's approach was anything but ordinary. His tone was sharp, his commands abrupt, and his hand hovered far too close to his holstered weapon. "Step out of the vehicle," Colson barked. Anthony complied, his hands visible, his movements slow. But compliance didn't ease the officer's aggression. Witnesses nearby would later describe how Colson shoved Anthony against the car, his voice growing louder, his actions more erratic. Where the sudden escalation? Why did a man known for his community leadership become the target of such hostility? The answers, it seemed, weren't in Anthony's actions, but in something far more insidious: bias, unchecked power, and the weight of a system designed to protect its own. The encounter turned violent in moments. A shove turned into a punch into handcuffs. By the time it was over, Anthony lay on the ground, bruised and bloodied, as bystanders filmed the incident on their phones. What Officer Colson didn't know, what he couldn't have predicted, was that those videos would spark a chain reaction that would lead to the most unexpected twist of his life. The videos went viral within hours. Protests erupted, demanding answers and accountability. Colson was placed on administrative leave, but the department kept silent. Meanwhile, Anthony recovered in the hospital, his mind racing. He wasn't just a victim, he was someone with a voice, a platform, and soon a position of power. Coulson received a position of primary sublingual support and rolled in on Saturdays for minutes, keeping an eye on C.H. Lance's office. The story could have ended here, with Anthony seeking justice through the courts or the media, but it didn't. In fact, what came next would leave even the most skeptical observers stunned, because this was never just about a traffic stop. It was about a reckoning that would shake the entire police department to its core. What do you think? Could anyone in Anthony's position have handled this differently? Would you have had the strength to stay composed, knowing the world was watching? Let us know in the comments. And don't go anywhere. The most shocking revelations are still ahead. As protests erupted outside the station and news of the traffic stop spread like wildfire, the department was forced to act. Officer Derek Coulson was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. On the surface, it seemed like a step toward accountability. But what most people didn't know was that behind the scenes, the case had already attracted the attention of powerful figures, people with the authority to dig deeper. The videos taken by bystanders were damning. They showed not just aggression, but something more chilling, a deliberate escalation, as if Coulson wanted to provoke a response. Public pressure mounted, with demands for transparency growing louder by the hour. Meanwhile, inside the precinct, whispers began to circulate. This case had caught the eye of someone far above his rank. This case had caught the eye of someone far above his rank. The announcement came quietly, buried in a late-night press release. An external investigator had been assigned to the case. What wasn't mentioned in the release, but was already being discussed in hushed tones within the department, was the identity of this investigator. Someone who had a personal connection to this case. Someone who would not let this slide. As Coulson sat at home, shielded by the silence of the department, he had no idea what was unfolding just a few blocks away. Files were being pulled, witness statements reviewed, and at the center of it all, a name that would send shockwaves through the precinct: Anthony Reed. But not as a victim. This time as the department's newly appointed chief of police. How could this have happened? How could a man brutalized on camera rise to the top of the very system that failed him? The truth was, this wasn't a coincidence. Reed had been quietly working behind the scenes, leveraging the community's support, the media's spotlight, and his own unshakable resolve to ensure this would never happen again. Not to him, not to anyone. But Anthony Reed wasn't stepping into this role to seek revenge. No, his mission was far greater. He intended to rebuild trust, hold officers accountable, and change the culture from within. And his first order of business? Reviewing every detail of the Coulson investigation. What would Officer Coulson do when faced with the man he thought he had silenced? How would the department respond to this seismic shift in power? And, most importantly, what does justice look like when it's delivered by the person who was wronged? The answers to these questions are coming, but they won't be what you expect. Stay tuned, because the revelations ahead will leave you questioning everything you know about justice, power, and redemption. It was a day like any other at the precinct, or so it seemed. Officers filed in, conversations filled the air, and the usual hum of activity marked the start of another shift. But for Derek Coulson, the day was far from ordinary. He had been summoned to an internal review meeting. No details were given, but Coulson assumed it would be just another routine inquiry. What Coulson didn't know was that this meeting would be anything but routine. As he entered the conference room, a strange silence fell over the officers present. There was no small talk, no sideways glances, just a weight in the air that Coulson couldn't quite place. Then the door opened. Anthony Reed walked in, wearing a crisp uniform and a calm expression. But this wasn't the same Anthony Reed who had been dragged from his car and beaten on the pavement. No, this was Chief Anthony Reed, the newly appointed head of the department, the man now responsible for the very system that had once failed him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Coulson's face drained of color as recognition set in. The man he'd thought he had silenced, the man he'd dismissed as just another victim, now stood at the helm of his career's fate. It was a reckoning, but not the kind Coulson had anticipated. Coulson felt his biggest opportunities in life were refining as a lawyer, preparing for his own life. "Officer Coulson," Reed began, his voice steady, "we're here to review the events of that night." Reed's tone wasn't vengeful. It was measured, deliberate, and unshakable. He didn't need to raise his voice to command the room. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and everyone knew it. The irony was impossible to ignore. Here was a man who had suffered under the weight of a broken system, now tasked with repairing it. Reed's leadership wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. But for Coulson, the reality was crushing. The very badge he had used to justify his actions was now under scrutiny, and there was no escaping the consequences. In the weeks that followed, Reed began implementing sweeping changes: mandatory bias training, body camera audits, an open-door policy for community grievances. He wasn't just leading the department, he was transforming it. And at the center of it all was the Coulson investigation, a case that would serve as a symbol of the new era Reed was ushering in. Coulson, once untouchable in his arrogance, now found himself answering for every decision he made that night. The hearings were relentless, the evidence overwhelming, and the community watching closely. Reed ensured the process was fair, transparent, and unyielding. Justice, he believed, had to be more than a word. It had to be an action. What happened to Derek Coulson? Was he held accountable for his actions? And how did Anthony Reed's leadership reshape the department in the wake of such a public reckoning? The answers lie in the journey that followed, a journey that continues to inspire questions about power, redemption, and the true meaning of justice. Stay with us as we unravel the aftermath of this incredible story, and as always, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in these conversations. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story that needs to be told. And so the story reaches its resolution. Officer Derek Coulson faced the consequences of his actions that night. Following an extensive internal investigation, Coulson was dismissed from the force, his badge no longer a shield for misconduct. It was a decision that sent a clear message: no one is above accountability. But this case wasn't just about one man's actions. It was about a system that allowed those actions to happen in the first place. Under Anthony Reed's leadership, the department saw a wave of reforms aimed at rebuilding trust. Policies were rewritten, training programs intensified, and a new standard for transparency was set. Reed's mission wasn't about revenge. It was about change. He turned his pain into purpose, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what he did. But as we reflect on this story, we're left with bigger questions. What does justice really look like in cases like this? Is it enough to hold individuals accountable, or do we need to go further, challenging the systems that enable injustice in the first place? And most importantly, how do we ensure that accountability is consistent, fair, and lasting for everyone? Now I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think this system is capable of real change, or is this just the beginning of a much longer fight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice is a vital part of this conversation. If you found this story as compelling as we did, take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. These are the stories that need to be told, and with your support, we can keep bringing them to light. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll never miss an episode. We're here every week uncovering the truths behind the headlines and shining a light on the stories that matter most. Robert Floyd, are you ready? A familiar voice asked. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay engaged.